The doctors and orderlies treated me like a wild animal to be sedated and locked away. The therapy only exacerbated my plunge into madness. Every pill was torture without reprieve. The walls closed in around me like the jaws of a ravenous beast. Every breath felt like inhaling wet concrete. My hands trembled as I clutched the thin bed sheet, twisting it into tight ropes. The asylum's oppressive silence weighed on my soul more than any shrieks or tormented howls could. I'd seen terrors beyond comprehension, visions that stripped away any sense of reality. Faceless specters pursued me through labyrinthine hallways that warped and pulsed with malevolent energy. Disembodied voices hissed vile obscenities, or worse, truths about myself I couldn't bear to confront. I had to escape this waking nightmare, by any means necessary. An orderly's mistake left my door unlatched during evening rounds. In a heartbeat, I exploded from my cot, caged beast unleashed. I clutched the sharpened toothbrush in my fist like a dagger as I burst into the hallway, frenzied eyes scanning for an exit or weapon. Something heavy and metallic protruded from a supply cart. A shovel, yes. I snatched it, wheeling around just as a startled attendant appeared. One deafening crack across his jaw, and he collapsed in a heap. This was my chance. I had to seize it and never look back. My heart pounded like a jackhammer as I gripped the shovel's solid wooden handle. This was it, my one shot at freedom. The hallway seemed to stretch into infinity, with orderlies sure to come running any second. I bolted towards the nearest exit. A flashing red sign glowed above a sturdy metal door a mile way out. I reared back and let the shovel's heavy blade crash against the lock with every ounce of desperate strength. The first few blows clanged uselessly off the reinforced steel. Panic clawed at my chest as muffled shouts echoed down the corridor. I was so close. With a primal roar, I pounded again and again until the mechanism finally shattered in a shower of shrapnel. Seizing the handle with both hands, I slammed my entire body against the door. Fresh air washing over me for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I gulped down the crisp chill, savoring the flood of freedom. Heavy footsteps stampeded behind me as burly guards charged into the hallway. The biggest one raised a rusted baton, beady eyes burning with fury. "Stop right there, psycho!" I didn't think. I reacted on pure animalistic instinct. Whirling the shovel in a wide arc, I swung the blade directly at the brute's face. He raised his forearm to deflect the blow, but the heavy steel caught him square in the wrist. His scream of agony was drowned out by the sickening crunch of shattered bone. The others froze, stunned by my brutality. That split second was all I needed. I pivoted on my heel and sprinted out the exit, shovel still gripped tightly. The crunch of gravel under my flimsy slippers echoed the frantic pounding in my skull. Cool night air whipped across my face as the desolate forest whipped past in a blur of shadows. Behind me, the enraged asylum guards barked orders, unleashing attack dogs into the darkness. Their snarls closed in rapidly, but adrenaline surged through my veins, carrying me faster and faster into the unknown depths. Lungs gasping, I plunged into the pricker brush, ramming the shovel through thorny underbrush to carve a narrow path. Hot blood trickled down my cheeks from 1,000 tiny lacerations, but I kept tunneling, putting as much distance between myself and that hell on earth. When my legs finally gave out, I collapsed onto a soft bed of damp leaves. The only sounds were my own ragged gasps and the gentle whispers of the forest. A strange calm washed over me as I gazed up at the infinite canopy of stars. Whatever this new darkness held, it had to be better than that waking nightmare. I was free. As the asylum's shouts and barking dogs faded into the distance, an eerie stillness descended upon the shadowy woodlands. Only the occasional hoot of an owl pierced the silence. Despite the fatigue weighing down my limbs, an almost giddy sense of happy buoyed my spirit. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the rich, loamy scents of wet earth and decaying leaves. A euphoric grin spread across my face as the damp soil squished between my bare toes. Reaching down, I reclaimed the shovel that had been my key to liberty. Its solid heft in my grasp was immensely reassuring as I trekked further into the unknown depths. Every few steps, I paused to sweep the blade in a wide arc, clearing a path through the thick underbrush. I moved steadily onwards, guided only by the muted glow of the crescent moon filtering through the canopy overhead. Occasionally, flitting shadows in my peripheral vision made me start, the shovel raised defensively. But the forest remained hauntingly quiet, as if holding its breath. At some point, I became aware that I was humming tunelessly to myself, an old habit from my childhood. The wordless melody broke the oppressive silence in a comforting way. I grinned again, surprising even myself. Who would have thought being trapped in the woods at night could feel so incredibly freeing? That's when the first giggle burbled up from my chest, a small thing at first, but growing steadily into deep, raucous belly laughs. I doubled over, wheezing for air as impossible mirth poured out in waves. Here I was, a half-naked lunatic fleeing into the pitch-black forest armed with nothing but a rusty shovel. It was all so deliciously, absurdly insane. Wiping tears of laughter from my eyes, I straightened up and prepared to press onwards. Out here, unshackled from the crushing rules and brutal routines, perhaps true recovery was finally possible. With renewed determination, I tightened my grip on the shovel and strode forward to greet the uncertain future, letting the woods engulf me once more. The laughter died in my throat as abruptly as it had begun. A chill raced down my spine, raising goosebumps along my arms and legs. Something wasn't right. "Who's there?" I croaked, hating how my voice quavered with barely suppressed terror. An icy tendril of fear wrapped around my guts. Only the metallic ringing in my ears answered, growing louder and more maddening with each passing heartbeat. I shook my head violently, desperate to clear it. This couldn't be happening, not again. I squeezed my eyes shut, silently pleading for the hallucinations to subside like they always eventually did back at the asylum. But when I cracked my eyelids open, the forest seemed to undulate unnaturally in a thick, viscous flow. The tree trunks stretched and contorted, their gnarled branches transforming into twisted, clawing appendages. My breath caught in my throat as a pair of fathomless pits opened in the bark of the nearest trunk, fixing me with a soulless, hungry stare. No! No, no, no! I backpedaled, nearly tripping over an exposed root. Shapes pressed in from every side now, grotesque humanoid figures oozing forth from the very earth itself. Their lolling tongues and gnashing teeth seemed to beckon me close. Blind panic propelled me deeper into the darkened maze of trees and shrubbery, heedless of the branches whipping my face and clutching thorns that scored burning lines across my bare flesh. Just when I thought I could run no further, I burst into a moonlit clearing and pitched forward, slamming into the damp loam. I lay there, choking and retching, as the disturbing forest visions slowly receded. But the night's deep silence had been shattered, replaced by a faint droning chant that raised the hackles on the back of my neck. Pushing up to my knees, I peered through the gloom toward the source of the ominous intonations. There, silhouetted against the tree line on the far side of the clearing, moved a circle of indistinct figures weaving in a rhythmic spiral dance. The air seemed to thicken around me as the chanting grew louder, more guttural. I shrank back against the loamy earth, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was witnessing. The figures undulated as one, their movements unnaturally smooth and hypnotic. I opened my mouth to cry out, to beg them to stop this strange ritual, but my voice died in my throat. A creeping sense of dread slithered up my spine as one of the shapes broke away from the twisting circle. It glided towards me with unsettling purpose. As it neared, a cold sliver of moonlight revealed its visage, a mask-like face etched in harsh lines, eyes hollowed out into black pits. Its lips remained parted in a rictus grin, white teeth glinting in the pale light. A scream finally burst from me then. I scrambled backwards, scrabbling madly at the soil as the thing continued its inexorable advance. Gnarled hands stretched towards me, their bony fingers hooked into claws. "Stay back!" I snarled, though the quaver in my voice betrayed my fear. The creature cocked its head, a rattling hiss spilling from its lipless maw. Distantly, I became aware of the other shapes converging, free now from the rhythmic spiral to join their brethren. I lashed out blindly, felt my fist connect with one rubbery form. It barely stuttered in its approach. Another grasped my ankle in its vice-like grip. I bucked wildly, desperate to break free, but only succeeded in attracting more of the monstrosities. A dozen spindly arms pinned me, talons biting into my flesh. I howled in pain and fury, thrashing uselessly. Looming over me now, the lead creature extended a wizened hand and its cracked lips parted in a sepulchral rasp. "Trespasser." The syllables hung in the air, dripping with menace. My terror reached a crescendo as I stared into those terrible, empty sockets. I could feel my sanity fraying at the edges. There had to be some way to escape this nightmare. Clenching my jaw, I let out a guttural roar and... The monstrosities hissed and shrieked, their claws raking in my exposed flesh as I writhed. Somehow, one of my arms wrenched loose. Without thinking, I lashed out, felt my knuckles crunch against something yielding. An eerie wail split the air as one of the beasts recoiled, releasing its grip. Seizing my chance, I jackknifed it upright and flung myself bodily in a random direction. Gnarled branches whipped in my face as I careened blindly through the night-shrouded forest. The sounds of pursuit rang out behind me. Terror winged my stride, forcing me to push past the screaming protests of my battered body. How long I ran, I couldn't say. At some point, the noises faded away. Hallucinations. Again and again. But that monster's was different. My foot caught on an upturned root and I sprawled gracelessly into the loam, the wind knocked from me. As I lay there, chest heaving, something caught my eye through the latticework of branches alight. At first, I dismissed it as another insidious trick of my mind. But as I squinted against the darkness, it remained, wavering but unmistakably real amidst the gloom. A sudden swell of hope nearly choked me. Staggering upright, I oriented myself toward that blessed beacon and began stumbling in its direction with wild abandon. With each faltering step, the glow intensified, as if beckoning me on. My boots skidded in the dirt as I crested a small rise and beheld the source, a ramshackle cabin nestled in a clearing, the unmistakable tendril of wood smoke drifting from the stone chimney. Yellow light spilled from the solitary window, rendering the structure almost luminous against its shadowy backdrop. I froze, my desperation to reach that promised sanctuary fighting against the ingrained weariness that had kept me alive these past, harrowing hours. What if the horrors that pursued me lay in wait within those wooden walls? My legs trembled with exhaustion and pain blossomed across my ravaged body as if reminded of the miles I'd pushed myself. There was no choice, I resolved grimly. My decision made, I started down the slope, half stumbling in my haste. As I neared, I raised my hoarse voice in a croaking shout, praying it would reach ears both willing and able to provide sanctuary. "Hello?" I called, desperation underpinning that single word. "Please, help me!" My rattling cry went unanswered at first, swallowed by the dense woods. I limped closer, boots scuffing over the hard-packed earth of the small clearing surrounding the cabin. Raising my voice again, I managed a raspy hello. "Is anyone there?" This time, the shuttered window creaked open a few inches. A pair of rheumy eyes peered out at me suspiciously from a deeply lined face framed by a wild tangle of gray hair and beard. "State your purpose, stranger," a reedy voice demanded, wavering between apprehension and outright hostility. "These are my woods. You'd best turn back the way you came." I held up my hands in a placating gesture, wincing at the grown-up protesting muscles. "Please, I mean no harm. My name is Jacob. I've had a terribly long night fleeing from." I trailed off, hesitant to recount the full nature of the nightmare I'd endured for fear of being dismissed as raving. "Just please, I'm in need of shelter. A place to rest, even if just for a few hours until first light." The eyes narrowed further, seemingly weighing the truthfulness of my words. For an endless moment, I braced myself for the shutter to clap close, leaving me once more at the mercy of the encroaching dark and its sinister denizens. Then, at last, the old man gave a grudging nod. "Very well. But mind yourself, I'll suffer no trouble nor indecencies beneath my roof." With that curt warning, he disappeared from the window. A few seconds later, the cabin's sturdy oak door swung open with a groan of protest, framing the flickering glow of a modest fire inside. Openly relieved, I hurried across the clearing toward it. The hunched figure reappeared in the doorway, appraising me with frank skepticism as I approached. Now that I could see him fully, I perceived he stood barely 5 feet in height, like some wizened garden gnome festooned in a coarse homespun robe belted with hempen cord. I stepped across the threshold, ducking my head beneath the low lintel, and found myself in a dimly lit single room that seemed to comprise the hermit's entire humble abode. A smoke-stained hearth occupied one corner, its merry flames casting wavering shadows over the few sticks of plain, functional furniture. The old man waved a gnarled hand toward a tattered but clean pallet atop a rope-strung cot. "You may rest there for the night." His small eyes glinted in the firelight as they roamed my disheveled form once more. "Though you'll want to bank those cinders first." I nodded gratefully and hurried to comply, using a metal poker to spread out the glowing logs and sprinkle a layer of ash over top. As the flames settled into slumbering embers, I noticed the hermit scrutinizing me with an unsettling intensity. "You have an anguished look about you, boy," he muttered, almost to himself. "As one who's known suffering in this life." I met his gaze steadily, wondering how much to divulge. The visions that tormented me defied easy explanation. I could only hope this strange recluse might offer a sympathetic ear. "I've endured troubles, that's true. Darkness that even now feels poised to reclaim me if I let my guard down for an instant." The old man's bushy brows knitted as he studied me further. At length, he gave a solemn nod. "Well, you're under my protection tonight at least. This cabin's been harrowed and blessed, no evil force shall breach its walls and rafters while I stand watch." Despite my weariness, an uneasy chill prickled my flesh. The sorcerous ceremonies I'd witnessed in those haunted woods made me wonder just what sort of magics this aged hermit might command. Still, I managed a grateful half-smile as I settled onto the musty pallet. "Your hospitality is more than I could have hoped for." "Thank you." The weeks drifted by in a hazy routine of chores and forced idleness. Each morning I'd rise before the sun, stoke the dwindling fire and set a pot of water to boil for the hermit's breakfast tea. As he sipped a bitter brew, I'd receive my instructions for the day, gathering deadwood, tending the small garden patch, repairing sagging portions of the roof thatch. Simple tasks, but they kept my hands and mind occupied. The old hermit watched me, his craggy features betraying pity, concern. I couldn't quite decipher his guardedly neutral expression. In unguarded moments, my thoughts strayed to my former life, my career, my loved ones, the comfortable routines I'd once taken for granted. Had it really been mere months since that existence was shattered? Since I'd been condemned to rot in that snake pit asylum? Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago that I was a husband, a father, before the visions stole everything. Evenings brought respite as I sprawled beside the low-burning hearth and listened to the hermit's rambling tales over a shared bowl of thin gruel. His gravelly voice wove fanciful accounts of spirits dwelling within the ancient forest, of trees with thoughts and willful branches, of sacred glades where dark rituals still played out on moonless nights. I knew better than to voice any skepticism over the old man's beliefs. He'd granted me safe harbor, and I dared not risk his ire. So I simply nodded and betrayed no reaction, all the while unable to shake a vague sense of weariness toward my benefactor. As another gray dawn tinged the cabin's long window, I resolved to prove my trustworthiness through steadfast labor. The morning chores left my hands callous but my mind unusually clear. Perhaps it was the familiar motions of tending the modest garden or the mindless physicality of repairing the thatched roof. Or maybe a side effect of the herb-laced tea the old hermit insisted I drink each morning. Whatever the reason, coherent thoughts flourished in the stillness like seedlings after rain. I found my mind dwelling increasingly on the circumstances that had brought me here to this rickety cabin in the woods, living under the begrudging protection of its gruff owner. The schizophrenic visions that had shattered my grip on reality and landed me in the asylum's padded hellhole. Phantom voices and nightmarish apparitions had tormented me for months before the final break. At first, just faint whispers in the darkness when I'd strained to separate them from the normal ambient noises of night. Then inky shapes materializing in my peripheral vision, prompting frantic blinks and head turns that never allowed a clear view before they dissolved. Just my mind playing sickening tricks, I'd rationalized at the time, letting myself be gaslit by my adult psyche. Soon the hallucinations became permanently. Leering demonic faces pushing through solid walls, their lolling tongues leading putrid streaks of slime. Claws raking elongated shadows across the bedroom ceiling before coagulating into a malevolent, pulsating form. Guttural chants swelling from unseen throats, weaving hypnotic patterns that turned my thoughts inside out. I shuddered, snapping free from the waking flashback as a bead of sweat trickled down my temple. I gripped the herb-bundled roof beam, its grounding texture reminding me I knelt safely on the cabin's rickety roof. For the moment, anyway. As the unwanted memories receded, I realized my jaw had grown taut with suppressed anguish. Those last tortures had nearly destroyed me. If not for the asylum's straitjacket and pills, I may have succeeded in obliterating my own existence just to escape the unrelenting anguish. But they had failed to purge the demons. I still awoke some nights with my throat searing from screams, pawing at the visions only I could perceive. Perhaps that fear of having the night terrors resurface with no escape subconsciously accounted for my lingering wariness toward the hermit. He couldn't possibly comprehend the depth of my affliction. If the hallucinations returned while isolated here with him, with no sedatives or padded walls for protection, I stood abruptly, shoving the thought aside as vertigo swamped me atop the cabin's peaked roof. Clinging to the fragile beam for balance, I focused on the grounding textures all around the sun-warmed wood, the whistling breeze stirring the moss-padded branches, the pungent tang of pine needles and petrichor. Dusk settled like a velvet shroud over the cabin, throwing the hermit's elongated shadow in stark relief against the porch slats. I hung back, coiled rope in hand, observing his strange ritual with a furrowed brow. Each soul that walks these ancient woods borrows life from the forest, he intoned in a ceremonial rasp. We must honor the Great Mother's gift with reciprocity. With those words, he produced a tarnished blade, its wicked edge glinting dully. Before I could interject, he raked the metal across his forearm in one fluid motion, hissing through clenched teeth. Viscous crimson beaded along the fresh wound, languidly snaking down his wrists. I recoiled, bit clenching with queasiness and confusion. Some offering of thanks, this twisted blood rite. Yet the wizened hermit showed no signs of pain or delirium, merely staring at the gash with an expression akin to reverence. "Watch closely, Jacob," he murmured, extending his lacerated arm toward a gnarled oak gargling with sap at its base. "The mother will receive what is due." At first, nothing seemed amiss apart from the lurid streaks now marring the bark's coarse ridges as the hermit smeared his blood in concentric rings around the trunk. My throat ran dry, the coiled rope slipping from numb fingers as my temples pulsed with panic's first disorientating waves. A gurgling rasp, not unlike the death rattle of a drowning man, issued from deep within the tree's core, or was it merely the wind punishing the eaves in mock reproach? The shadows seemed to elongate in sympathy with that eldritch, existential dread saturating my bones. A deafening susurrus arose all around, resonating in my skull like the onset of another schizophrenic break. My hands clapped desperately over my ears, futilely attempting to stem the tidal psychic onslaught, but it had already breached my mind's ramparts. As the forest's viperous voices washed over me in a numbing tide of madness, I felt my psyche splinter anew into fragments of stark raving insanity. The hermit regarded me with eyes glistening in the gloom. "You have witnessed a great mother's awakening," he intoned in a voice dripping with ceremonial portent. "On the night of the blood moon, her hunger must be sated through an ancient rite." An icy trickle of dread snaked down my spine. What rite? My voice emerged strangled, scarcely more than a reedy rasp. The hermit's sunken features contorted in a humorless rictus. "A sacrifice, Jacob. A blood offering to slake the hunger of these ancient woods." A quaking hand rose instinctively to shield my hammering heart. "You've seen the signs all around us," the wizened figure persisted, spreading arms to encompass the gnarled forest. "The mother's restlessness heralds the death of one cycle and the violent birth of another. Only the sanguine sacrament can restore balance." Here was a true believer taken hostage by his own extremist convictions, a zealot wholly consumed by insanity's rapacious flames. A cold sweat burst across my brow. "You will assist me in the ceremony, Jacob," he proclaimed with solemn finality. "Willingly or not, the mother's hunger shall be slaked on the night the blood moon bathes us in her crimson anointment." When the next words emerged, they carried the leaden weight of a surrender to inevitability. What do you need from me?" The question seemed to reverberate through the watching woods with portentous menace. The hermit's leathery lips split into a hideous parody of a smile, revealing a maw of decayed fangs. "Your participation in the sacrament, Jacob. Nothing more, and nothing less." You want to kill me?" I rasped, scouring his gnarled features for any hint of hesitation or insincerity. "That's insane. I won't let you dash. The mother demands blood, a sacrifice to renew the cycle." He cut me off, that fanatical glint burning brighter in his rheumy eyes. "Whether you resist or accept your role renders no difference. The ancient rites will be observed." Bitterness and desperation flooded my mouth, my hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. All this time I'd been at his mercy, deluded into thinking I could find solace here after my escape. Now the truth was laid bare. I'd merely exchanged one form of captivity for another. "You're completely unhinged," I spat through gritted teeth. "I'm not some damned animal to be slaughtered for your sick pagan rituals. If you will not give yourself willingly, the ceremony will be unpleasant for you." His tone remained infuriatingly even, as if lecturing a petulant child. "Struggle and the mother's wrath will only be incurred. You'll beg for a merciful death long before the rites are complete." A violent shudder rippled through me at the unspoken horrors implied by those cryptic words. Flashes of torment, blades parting flesh and torrents of hot vitae, flickered through my mind's eye like sadistic tableaus. Surely he didn't intend to. No, I couldn't allow such thoughts to take root. "I won't just roll over and let you butcher me, old man," I growled, falling into a defensive crouch. Every taut muscle coiled with the frenzied energy of an animal backed into an inescapable corner. "It's me or you." The hermit's laughter was a hollow, rattling wheeze that scraped raw furrows across my last tattered shreds of composure. "So it shall be the hard way, I see. No matter, your struggles merely delay the inevitable fruition of the rites." "Fine, you decrepit bastard," I snarled, every word riven by the heat of defiance. "If it's a sacrifice you want, it'll be feeding the forest's hunger this night." I tried to punch him. His sunken eyes blazed with a verdant, baleful radiance that robbed the breath from my lungs. But he transformed. He was transformed into an evil. What in God's name are you? The words tore from my constricted throat in a hoarse rasp. The creature that had been the hermit reared up, misshapen limbs unfurling in a grotesque facsimile of branching wood. When it spoke, the voice reverberated through the forest like the groaning of ancient timbers. I am the heart of these woods, the living embodiment of nature's inexorable cycle. Life springing from death, death feeding new life. Its maw contorted in a rictus grin that spoke of unholy revelries. You feeble beings name me dryad, nymph, hern, I care not for your paltry labels. I am existence itself, eternal and all-consuming. A life for uncounted lives yet to flourish, the abomination intoned, its words carrying the weight of inarguable inevitability. You should feel honored to have your feeble spark subsumed into the verdant depths. Your death will beget verdant renascence beyond your pitifully limited comprehension. The dryad thing reared up, bark-like skin cracking as new limbs unfurled with organic fluidity. Its mouth contorted in a bestial leer, rows of thorn-like teeth glinting wetly in the firelight. The cyclopean dryad shambled forward, multiple limbs gouging deep furrows in the loamy soil. Each ponderous step boomed like footfalls from a towering oak-gibbon ambulation. Rivulets of foul-smelling sap oozed from the rents in its hide, pooling with viscous lushness in its wake. Panic overcame base reason at the sight of that relentless advance. I spun on my heel, bolting headlong into the pitch-dark woods with no aim except the pure animal instinct for escape. The brambles and branches that raked my skin with lacerating kisses barely impeded me. The distance afforded no respite. The air around me seemed to thicken and churn as I flung myself at the towering dryad abomination. My hands clawed at its gnarled, bark-like flesh, seeking purchase to rend and tear with the feral desperation of a cornered animal. But its hide was unyielding as petrified oak. The dryad's mammoth limbs whipped around with blurring speed, batting me aside like a trifling gnat before its cyclopean wrath. I crashed back to the loamy earth in an explosion of pain, the wind brutally expelled from my lungs. As I gasped for breath, my gaze instinctively tracked toward the hellish bonfire at the grove's center. Unbidden, half-repressed memories surfaced like noxious bubbles, my hand clenched so violently around the gun that the knuckles went pale, that last, gut-wrenching scream abruptly stilled with a meaty thud. I recoiled in horror as the visions intensified, assaulting me with a kaleidoscope of imagery more vivid and agonizing than any past hallucination. With each quickening pulse, more submerged traumas heaped forth like drowning corpses, the bitter taste of cornered despair when the bills mounted inexorably, the self-loathing that festered like an abscess from years of fruitless job searches, the impotent anguish ever present in my wife's reddened eyes. Childhood terrors. I was 7 years old again, flinching beneath the stairs as my father's shadow fell across the floor in drunken, shambling arcs. Each hastily shushed whimper from my mother seemed to fan the flames of his towering, irrational rages. My throat was ravished by the shrieking keening that spilled forth in virulent streams, overwhelming even the dryad's rumbling chants and the sibilant soughings of the sentient forest. Even as the tidal psychosis threatened to sweep me under, some primal flicker of self-preservation sparked within my adult consciousness. With a defiant bellow ripping from my throat, I summoned every ounce of waning vitality and hurled myself bodily at the leering dryad. Distant screams and bestial howls echoed all around, the malevolent energies of the sentient forest coalescing in answer to the dryad's guttural invocations. Tendrils of rope vegetation lashed across my back like thorn whips, but I scarcely registered the searing pain. Every fiber strained in maddened exertion as I wrestled the towering monster towards the blazing pyre. Its thunderous roars shook the earth, cloven hooves gouging deep rowels as it fought against my relentless momentum. I was heedless of its thrashing superiority, unmoved by the bone-crushing force battering my battered body. Only the fever-bright compulsion to end this profane ritual drove me in that moment. With a resounding crash of snapping timber, I bore the dryad down into the insatiable maw of the raging bonfire itself. Its keening shrieks rent the air like a banshee chorus as the verdant sinews blackened and peeled away in smoldering strips. The reek of charred, dripping sap overwhelmed even the acrid with smoke stinging my eyes. Lurching to my feet in a haze of agony, I turned from the pyre's dying embers and lurched deeper into the enshrouding forest gloom. The dryad's death shrieks still reverberated through the haunted woodland, echoing the primal fear coursing through my veins. Every ragged inhalation seared my abused lungs like molten shards. Staggering steps carried me past the smoldering pyre remains, the acrid stench of charred vegetation clinging to my sweat-soaked skin. I moved in a stumbling daze, one hand pressed against the jagged furrows scoring my flesh, vainly attempting to stem the crimson seepage. My other arm swept numbly at the clutching branches that whipped across my path, snapping brittle twigs underfoot. My breath tore in ragged exhalations, throat scoring anew with each panicked respiration. Blood loss and unbearable exertion conspired to leach the strength from my limbs. How long I fled in blind, hapless terror, I could not say. And I saw light. Again. Looked like in beginning my path. Staggering towards the one illumination like a beggar entreating salvation, I broke through the final curtain of vegetation into a small forest clearing. Panting, I sagged against a gnarled trunk, legs trembling in protest beneath my weight. My eyes slowly refocused, adjusting to the ghostly ambience suffusing the night-shrouded glade. There, splayed across the verdant moss underfoot, I caught sight of faint impressions, footprints, and drag marks indicative of recent human presence. Another shuddering gasp escaped my lacerated lips as I gradually pieced together the macabre implication. I clutched the gnarled tree trunk, wheezing. That's when I noticed them dark shapes emerging from the tree lean opposite me. Hooded figures in tattered robes glided forth with unnatural grace, forming a semicircle around a crumbling stone dais at the clearing's center. My breath caught in my throat as I realized these must be the witches the hermit had raved about. One wizened crone stepped before the others, throwing back her cowl to reveal a lined, severe countenance. Feral eyes pinned me in place as a cruel smile split her cracked lips. Well, her reedy voice slithered through the night air. What have we here? The others echoed her ghastly chuckles as they closed ranks, barring any chance of escape. Fetid odors of decay and burning herbs wafted from their tattered garments. A lost lamb wandering astray into our sacred grove, the crone sneered. You blundered into a place no sane mortal should tread, foolish boy. Ice gripped my spine as her words rang true. This was no mere happenstance, the clearing's sinister ambience seemed to hum with malign sentience, as if the forest itself were a hungering predator savoring its next meal. The cowled figures raised gnarled hands, crooning in eerie unison. My head swam, vertigo gripping me as if the very earth had shifted beneath my feet. Desperate to flee, I pushed away from the trunk, and collapsed in a crumpled heap, legs refusing to support my weight. Mocking laughter assailed my senses as the encircling coven shuffled ever nearer. I rolled onto my back, chest heaving with each strained inhalation. Shadowy tendrils seemed to coalesce in the air above, reaching skeletal talons towards my prone form. The last thing I glimpsed before oblivion claimed me was the crone's leering visage, then only the yawning abyss of eternal night.